Hey guys, Crypto Sunday, and it's a very flat week. The app on my phone and prices here are slightly disagreeing, but this is saying 0.5% down. Nothing sort of really to write home about. The app is sort of saying I think £500 up. So yeah, it's a bit of a wash and sort of a mixed bag. On different coins, but we'll come back to that. A lot of news to get to. So looking at the coin shares report, sort of again a bit more of a muted week, 882 million in net inflows. I think we're going to get a sort of similar one tomorrow. And yeah, looking at by coin, it's almost all into Bitcoin, not a lot into Ethereum this week, 1.5 million. Very small amount into the multi-asset. Outflows out of Solana. It's the only sort of major coin, 3.4 million. Still inflow into XRP, 1.4. 11 million, nearly 12 million into SUI though. That was seems to be sort of getting a lot of love at the moment. I'm guessing that's just EU ETFs. So yeah, people are liking that. There's only 330 million in it. So they've had sort of fair bit of inflow recently, and yeah, small inflows into Litecoin, Cardano, a little bit of shorting Bitcoin, not much others. And by country, it's all sort of relatively small numbers, small outflows from Brazil, Canada, Hong Kong, and Sweden. 44 million into Germany, though, sort of notable. And yeah, sort of not a huge amount elsewhere. Looking at this week, sort of a little bit more muted. Monday sort of had a very small 5 million net inflow. Again, this sort of week has again been dominated by inflows into BlackRock and outflows from the rest for the most part. You've had sort of odd days, Wednesday and Friday with inflows, but the outflows from Fidelity and ARK and people have been larger than the inflows. So we don't know if they're, as far as I'm aware, we don't know if they're selling, ARK and Fidelity to buy BlackRock, or if this is separate people wanting to sell for some other reason, and then BlackRock getting different people in. I would imagine the latter, because BlackRock are sort of constantly marketing to their people, and they have people that are sort of fairly loyal to BlackRock, from what I understand. So they may be just convincing people, orange pilling, as they call it. And Ethereum is sort of very quiet, albeit it is a net inflow, largely dominated again by BlackRock's 57 million inflow on Wednesday. Aside from that, it's sort of small numbers across the board, slight outflow on Monday and Thursday. But yeah, sort of, what is that? 50, 60 million maybe overall. So yeah, we're getting some inflow into Ethereum, but it is certainly slow going. And sort of on a proportional basis, you'd sort of expect Ethereum, if you compare Ethereum's market cap to Bitcoin, you'd expect it to be maybe a bit more than this. I still think they need staking to have people go into these, because it's not hard to just sort of self-custody it yourself and then get a reasonable amount of staking reward if you're a big institution. So we have the weekly micro strategy, and it's a fairly big buy, 13,390. Obviously the demand is picking up again. Don't know whether they were selling their sort of dividend preferred shares or whether it was MicroStrategy itself, but yeah, 1.34 billion, again under the current price, so that's not too bad. This does obviously highlight that when they announce sort of Sunday night that they've been buying, and then on sort of Monday they announced this, it's pretty clear that they'd been buying 5 or 6 days before that, just judging by the prices that they'd paid. People often sort of say they're buying on Monday when they announce it. That's not how it works. But buying after the announcement. Some people are saying this, when they've acquired this, they're sort of doing it as they announce it. That's just nonsense. They're likely buying sort of, it could be sort of averaging in over a period of 3 or 4 days, almost a week before they put out these announcements. So yeah, up to 568,840 now, and average is pushing towards 70,000, which is low compared to some of the others we'll have a look at, but he's getting high considering it's such a big total. And from what I understand, they will have to pay a dividend, relatively large dividend on their sort of strike and strife stocks in a couple of months, less than a couple of months. I think they saw the 1st of July. So the cash flow from their business, it looked like they're loss making on their underlying software business. So that's got no hope at all of sort of paying these dividends. It's got far too large now. So yeah, they could potentially be having to sell some Bitcoin unless they can do some sort of I can't believe they would start issuing convertible debt to pay the dividend. That's issuing debt to not buy more Bitcoin just to pay the dividend. And then, yeah, if Bitcoin goes up, obviously these shares don't get converted into stock, so they would make money essentially from buying these. But yeah, you could have the sort of symbolic MicroStrategy sells Bitcoin to pay these dividends, which I'm sure will be met with wrath. But obviously MicroStrategy has kicked into life an enormous amount of sort of copycats and, not copycats, other companies just sort of buying Bitcoin with their treasuries. But there is an awful lot of people issuing debt and issuing stock to buy, similar to MicroStrategy. I did sort of mention before, companies that are issuing stock, obviously the shareholder takes the hit immediately from them selling new stock, and then if Bitcoin goes up, they do well over time. But that is safer because you don't have the sort of liquidation risk. If they're issuing stock, they don't have to sell the Bitcoin at any point. They've bought it, and as I say, the shareholder has sort of taken the hit, which they're presumably comfortable in doing, or they would have maybe sold the stock. Some of these stocks are going down when people are issuing stock, whereas people issuing debt, obviously that has to be paid back at some point. People are sort of issuing 3-year, 5-year debt, hoping that we'll be through a bear market and into the next bull market by the time they have to pay it back. And they could roll it potentially, but yeah, you're certainly getting an awful lot of companies. This Bitcoin Treasuries.net is tracking all of these companies, sort of sorted by amount of Bitcoin. Obviously, you got MicroStrategy there at the top, and then Marathon as as the next largest holder. And then you got these, obviously this new company 21, which is the Tether and Cantor Fitzgerald company that was sort of seeded with a large amount of Bitcoin. So starting at 31,000 Bitcoin, they go straight in at third. And then you've got obviously the miners and Coinbase, Block, people like that. But you are getting the sort of MicroStrategy impersonators starting to push up. Metaplanet, which, if I recall, is a Japanese hotel company that are doing the MicroStrategy playbook, basically. You've got other sort of companies here, and yeah, it goes all the way down to tiny little companies that you've sort of never really heard of that have 20 Bitcoin, 10 Bitcoin, which I think is, assuming they're not issuing debt to buy this. Maybe some of these are just buying it with profits or or cash that they had on the balance sheet. I think this is probably the stronger thing. If you start to broaden out this to hundreds and hundreds of companies, then that would be more of the positive. People always talk about like one Bitcoin. There isn't one Bitcoin for every millionaire. There's I think 22 million millionaires in the US, so there wouldn't be one Bitcoin just for all of them to have one. And if you start getting small companies like this buying 20, then yeah, that's even less, of course. I love that you got Argo blockchain there. Obviously, a stock that I lost massively on. Hold 3 Bitcoin apparently, so good for them. And then private companies. So you've got Tether, Block One at the top there. I think that was the EOS ICO that they originally did. They still hold an enormous amount, it looks like. And then governments, of course. Worth remembering that the UK is the 3rd largest government holding, as far as we know. Ukraine there, not quite sure how that works, if that's donations that are funding the war, unfortunately. And then North Korea. I wonder how they acquired 13,000. So just looking at some of these companies, obviously we've got Tether, shouldn't be forgotten about. They now hold 100,000 Bitcoin, and this gets updated quarterly when they announce their buys. Bought 16,000 in Q1, 16,700. So their number is just steadily going up, and obviously this is essentially with zero debt. 100,000 Bitcoin. Unencumbered by any debt whatsoever. It's entirely bought through profits. So that's a very, very strong holding. Basically the strongest holding in the world, you would say. SpaceX and Elon Musk appear to be not the best stewards of capital. They bought 25,000 Bitcoin back in February 2021, so that was sort of not the highs, but reasonable way up in the cycle. Was $33,000, topped out at sort of 68, and yeah, September, just a couple of months before the election, they sold 17,000 Bitcoin at $58,000. It's looking like, and then obviously you had the election. Shortly after, and sort of within 3 months of this, it was 109,000. So that was a poor sell. Obviously, Tesla held a great deal as well, and they sold sort of 75% of theirs. I think he was initially saying that they were testing liquidity, selling, and then they sold rather a lot. And that will be at obviously far, far lower prices than today. They might have needed the cash, I suppose, but SpaceX presumably don't. And they weren't exactly getting a huge amount for this Bitcoin, but yeah, SpaceX haven't done the best. And you have small companies like Semler Scientific, a healthcare company in the US. Looks like they're not issuing debt to buy this. They're just buying it with profits, and they now have 3,808. Or they had a reasonable amount of cash on the balance sheet as well. But their sort of enterprise value isn't that much higher than market cap. So I don't think they would be issuing that much debt. And they're sort of buying small amounts every month from the looks of it, 100, 160, 180, 200. So yeah, that's a decent sort of frequent buyer. Metaplanet, obviously as I say, the Japanese hotel company have basically turned into the Japanese MicroStrategy, and they are buying an awful lot. Sort of their recent buy, May the 9th, 1,200 Bitcoin is their pretty much their biggest buy. Oh yeah, does look by far their biggest buy actually. So yeah, you've got them in the mix now with 6,796. 21, as we mentioned, the Cantor Fitzgerald Tether thing. Guessing they're looking to do the MicroStrategy route in some way, but who knows when they'll get going. Mercado Libre I thought was quite interesting. I don't know whether they're sort of in financial services as well as just e-commerce, so don't know whether this would be holding it on behalf of sort of clients, or whether they're just allocating a part of their treasury. Obviously they're quite a big company, 130 billion. They hold 570, although I think the cost basis here is not quite right, because the Treasury at least is saying that they bought a fair amount at 53,000 in May 2021, pretty much the not far from the top, and then they bought some more in March at 82,000. So not quite sure how they would have a 38,000 cost basis, but thought that was interesting of a big company. You don't really hear getting into Bitcoin, presumably because they've only bought sort of $59 million worth, but yeah, not too bad. You had this thermal management and battery company as well, Cooler Technologies. Again, sort of not a huge amount, but sort of fairly frequently putting some of their cash into Bitcoin. 700, not too bad. I've not heard of these. Fold Holdings, rapidly emerging as a trailblazer in traditional finance and the Bitcoin economy. So it looks like they're essentially offering crypto services. They have cards and, looking to get into DeFi, and yeah, interesting. They hold 1,500. Looks like they made a large purchase in July, and then in March sort of increased that. Guessing that isn't with debt, because enterprise value is almost exactly the same. So that's pretty good unencumbered Bitcoin. This one I thought was really, really unusual. Angel Studios, a streaming company of essentially Christian films for the most part. So yeah, a video on demand service. I kind of thought this was going to be an adult entertainment company, but no, the Angel is more on the religious side than the adult side. They seem to have some fairly sort of mainstream actors in these films. I thought, when I read it, it was just going to be sort of, handheld camera type, cheaply made films, but these are big budget stuff from the looks of it. And yeah, they decided to buy 300 Bitcoin, not long before the election. So they've done quite well on that. $66,000 Bitcoin now, presumably 55-60% up. So I expect they're fairly happy. So Kango, this is the very, very unusual one that we sort of covered a few months back, a automotive lending company in China. Kango, 420 million market cap and a massively negative enterprise value. Not quite sure how they've done that, but yeah, maybe people selling off the stock because they don't like that they've pivoted into Bitcoin mining and holding the Bitcoin, basically. Looks like fairly steady increase, but not through buying. This looks like it's through mining and holding it, basically. Unless they have been buying, but I can't imagine that is. It's sort of fairly even on sort of first of the month. They're updating, and 470, 530 Bitcoin does sort of ring true with the exahash that they seem to have. And I did read that they are expecting to get to 50 exahash by July. So basically the same as Marathon and CleanSpark and Iron. So yeah, not another enormous miner in the space, but based in China, but trading on the New York Stock Exchange. So yeah, a fairly unusual one. This was a very unusual one. Hong Kong-based digital card and board game company. Although it does look like they're getting into sort of Web3 and investing in blockchain-based gaming and digital asset management infrastructure. So yeah, I suppose no real surprise that they're getting into Bitcoin. Again, it looks like they're not issuing debt to buy this, unless I'm mistaken, but they hold 3,350 at a decent average cost. They bought this sort of largely in early 2024 and not long after the election. So a lot of that at 94,000, admittedly, but a reasonable amount at 40,000. So they'd be fairly happy with that, you would think. And yeah, that is sort of a reasonably large holding, even though I guess they are getting into crypto. So originally it was sort of seen as a a board game and card game company getting into it, but yeah, probably count them as a crypto company now. And lastly, it looks like we have a Chinese MicroStrategy competitor, Next Technology. They changed their name from WeTrade Group to Next Technology in April. And yeah, it looks like they bought 833 Bitcoin back in 2023. Yeah, presumably sort of from AI, software business, but they have essentially now saying they're issuing debt or equity securities to go and buy Bitcoin, and they bought 5,000 Bitcoin in March, so seven or 8 weeks ago, at 82,000. So again, this average cost basis doesn't quite look right. If they've bought the bulk of their Bitcoin sort of 7 weeks ago, that doesn't ring true. But yeah, reasonably large MicroStrategy competitor now, 5,000 Bitcoin. And a second fairly large MicroStrategy competitor, it looks like, in China. Didn't think China would be sort of going for this sort of thing, but this is a sort of clothes retailer, diversified e-commerce retailer that is sort of somewhat focused on clothes. Announced plans to acquire $800 million worth of Bitcoin, up to 8,000 Bitcoin, which is obviously more than $800 million as of today. But they also said other major currencies, and they have mentioned they're keen to acquire Trump coin. So not quite sure how well that will go down, and why a Chinese company would want to acquire Trump coin is a little bit odd, with them being sort of sworn enemies, you would think, at the moment. I don't think it's quite that bad. You do see him, Trump and Xi, sort of getting together, and I think some of this is sort of orchestrated theatre, to be honest. But yeah, that seems a little bit odd. Chinese company issuing debt to buy Trump coin. Obviously, I would imagine the vast majority of that is going to go on Bitcoin. If they're talking about 8,000 Bitcoin, as I say, that's about $820 million now. So yeah, I would imagine the bulk of that is going on Bitcoin. But yeah, very odd. Getting more Masari reports coming out as well. So Metaplex released theirs. I won't go through the whole report because it's not a huge holding, but just thought it was worth looking at the key metrics overview. So daily average fungible tokens still looking very, very strong. 43,000 is up, massively from last year, and is sort of up, pretty much every quarter. They had a huge jump in Q4, and yeah, it's continued that positive trend. Daily average NFTs minted is low. We know NFTs aren't doing particularly well, so the sort of meme coins are certainly doing stronger. Core NFTs, this is their new, it looks like cheaper way of minting normal NFTs. That is doing quite well. 7,800, a little bit down on last quarter. And then compressed NFTs is still sort of all over the place. 880,000 was 2.2 million last quarter, but 400,000 previous quarter. So yeah, a little bit all over the place. Still don't know how this is going to do long term. It has huge potential in sort of like ticketing and things that just need a very, very small, almost irrelevant token to sort of to be proof of something, if you like. Fees as well, daily average fees almost exactly the same as last quarter in dollars and in Sol. And yeah, they're continuing to do buybacks. So I think there's 1 billion Metaplex token in total. So buying back 22 million in one quarter is pretty strong. 18 million previous quarter, and it's, you know, a fundamental thing that you can look at and say they're making money and buying back the token, sort of similar to a stock, rather than just hoping for sort of the next person to be, you know, selling it on to, you know, the sort of greater fool theory, selling it on to someone else willing to pay more. You have the company itself as the buyer, as long as people are doing things with NFTs and meme coins and things. So Radium, Q1, this is slightly more complicated, and I think we really need to see Q2 numbers from them, because Q1 is sort of a little bit old news now. Beginning of Q1, you had the Trump token launch, and Radium still sort of had a fairly big hand in that. And then towards the end of Q1, I think in sort of late March, you had Pump.Fun launch their market maker service. So Radium lost a reasonable amount of business from that. So yeah, the Q1 numbers do look pretty good, but we kind of know that they're, as I say, a bit old news, and we need to see what the new numbers are like. So this is where like quarterly reporting in crypto is sort of a little bit outdated, and you know, you could almost do with monthly on something like this, but I haven't found a reasonable place to sort of to get these numbers without paying a huge amount, and I don't really want to pay for the service. So yeah, the average volume on DEX is up to 3.6 billion, up from Q4. Guessing this is going to drop fairly substantially. DEX volume share is 46.9%, down a little bit from 56, and this I think will be down, you know, maybe in the 30s or maybe below. Global DEX volume, so including Ethereum DEXs and everything, they're at 15%. Again, they'll probably come down a reasonable amount. 20% of, yeah, so 20% of meme DEX volume, you know, Pump.Fun obviously will take a fair amount, but interesting that they only had 20% in that quarter, and they're getting into perpetual futures as well. So 21 million, that's a new number, so pretty good. And they are also doing buybacks, 15 million Ray bought back, so that's fairly good. Yeah, so there's 555 million total Ray in circulation, so or total supply at least. So 15 million bought back is very, very strong, sort of 3% of the total in one quarter. So pretty happy with that, and yeah, it's not looking too bad. But as I say, we need to see Q2 numbers really, or some at least something a little bit more recent to know where things are going with them. And global liquidity, so this was last week in global liquidity, and we're sort of slightly up, back towards the you know, interim high point that we saw at the beginning of May. Still a little bit up and down. This is my sort of newer liquidity measure. The other one that sort of seems to be a little bit off on data at the moment, in the black, sort of only goes back to April now for some reason. Can't seem to get that to work, but that sort of ticked up a little bit, well, down towards the beginning of the week, and then sort of largely back to where it was. So I am kind of using the newer one now as well. This seems to tie up a little bit more with cross-border capitals numbers as well. So that was quite nice, and I'll keep an eye on both of them, I suppose. So coins for the week, as I say, not a lot has moved. Bitcoin up about 0.4%, Solana down 0.5%, Ethereum up 2%, Chainlink down 3%. These are very, very small moves for crypto in a whole week. Helium up 2.7%, Jito down 4.5%, Radium up 4.5%, Metaplex down 7%, and Honey, which seems to be all over the place every week, down 15%. So That's not doing particularly well at the moment, but some of these have, sprung a little bit into life in recent weeks, and there's potential for a bit of an alt season, but I think we need to see a little bit more first. So yeah, leave your thoughts in the comments below and like and subscribe. See you soon.